Hi, my name is Dr. John Douillard, and as many of you know, I recently wrote a book called Eat Wheat, which made the bestseller list on Amazon, which I'm super excited about. And I want to take some time and debunk some of the myths around wheat and gluten. You know, we've all heard the science says wheat is the new poison, but very few have actually heard the science that suggests that it might actually be really important for us. You know, the gluten-free industry now is a $16 billion a year industry. There's marketing dollars at stake. And that's scary. We have to now really look at this with a fine-tooth comb. Is this a trend? Is it fact? Is it fad? What is it? And let's take a look and debunk some of those myths together, if you will. You know, one of the myths is that we've only been eating wheat for 10,000 years. Well, you got to understand now, they have found wheat, gluten in the teeth of ancient humans throughout Africa dating 3.4 to 4 million years ago. So we have a lot of genetics for eating wheat. In fact, we didn't start hunting our own meat until 500,000 years ago. It's safe to say that we have millions of years more genetics to digest wheat than we do meat. So we have to be careful about that. Now, yeah, wheat is a hard to digest protein, and around 10,000 years ago, it was hybridized. Like every other food that we eat today has been hybridized numerous times. So a lot of you will say, yeah, and the ancient wheat is way better than the modern wheat. Well, that's another myth I'd like to debunk for you. One is that they did studies where they took ancient wheat versus modern wheat, and they found that the ancient wheat had twice as much of the gluten as the modern wheat, okay? So the modern wheat doesn't have more gluten. Matter of fact, the ancient wheat had more. In fact, what they found was that the ancient wheat actually reduced inflammation by 2 times, lowered cholesterol, and lowered blood sugar significantly compared to the modern wheat. So the ancient wheat with more gluten actually lowered the inflammation by 2 times, lowered blood sugar, and lowered our cholesterol. So that's sort of interesting. In Wheat Belly, the book Wheat Belly, they cite studies. They say that there is a significant genetic difference between the ancient and the modern wheat. And in one of the studies they used to prove that point, they took about 50 ancient varieties of wheat and 36 modern varieties of wheat. And they gave them to people, and they saw how the immune system responded. If it responded like super high, it would create an inflammatory reaction. If it responded super low, then they were like, ooh, that might be a strain of wheat we want to then hybridize and give people low immune stimulating wheat. That was the reason why they did the study. Well, they found that out of 50 of the ancient wheats, 9 of them were low immune responders, and only 1 of the modern wheats were low immune responders, which means 1 of the modern wheats would have made a good wheat for everybody who had, gluten sensitivity or irritated intestinal skin. But what they didn't tell you in that study was that they had the exact same number of high immune responders, inflammatory triggers, in both the modern and the ancient wheat. So the ancient wheat didn't do any better for decreasing the inflammation and the irritation and the immune response in the intestinal tract. They don't tell you that part. They just tell you that it's a low responder, which is the only way that's good for you is you're trying to hybridize a brand new strain of wheat that's super low and easy for everybody to digest, which would be a good thing to do, I guess, but spelt is really good and rye is really good. There are already grains that exist. Sourdough bread, for example, when you make it the old-fashioned way where it takes 3 days to make versus 2 hours to make when you make a loaf of bread, it actually reduces the gluten content in the wheat to such an extent it actually renders it gluten-free. Yeah, that's right. Sourdough bread in numerous studies actually is rendered gluten-free. When they gave that sourdough bread to people with celiac disease, and I'm not suggesting anybody with celiac should eat wheat, but when they did, those people with celiac did not have any intestinal inflammation from the sourdough bread, which was rendered gluten-free from the fermentation process that takes place for days. Traditional artisan bread takes days and days and days to make, well, 3 days versus 2 hours, right? Which is just sort of crazy. So that's sort of another one that I wanted to help debunk for you, okay? Opioids. They also mentioned that wheat has opioids in it, and it's addictive, and you want to just have more and more of it. Okay, yes, wheat does have opioids in it. So does mother's milk. So does spinach. So does meat. So do a lot of foods have opioids in them. And I would venture to say that the reason why mother's milk has opioids in it is because we're supposed to drink it, right? And it makes us want more of it. And since we've been eating wheat for 3.5 to 4 million years ago, and a hunter-gatherer could gather enough wheatberry in the savanna grasses of Africa in 2 hours to feed them for an entire day, grind it up, make some mush, and eat them sitting in some big tall grass instead of trying to chase down a woolly mammoth or a lion or a tiger or a bear, which they didn't have there. But it's a lot easier to sit down and eat some grain, which had tons of fiber, tons of proteins, tons of starch. It was a whole food, actually. And people say, whoa, wait a minute. Why do I feel so lousy when I eat it? I get it. I understand you feel lousy, and there's a couple of reasons for it. Number one, we know that the pesticides on our foods, the pesticides in our environment, the toxins in our environment, of which there's 400 billion pounds of toxic chemicals dumped in the American environment every single year, they break down and kill the microbes in your mouth, esophagus, stomach, small and large intestine, which specifically make enzymes to digest the hard to digest components of wheat that everybody complains about. Okay, so yes, the pesticides in our food have done that, but we have to eat organic. We got to clean up our diet a little bit. And then the other thing is the processed foods that they've been feeding us ever since they took cholesterol out of our diet in 1960. And they replaced it with processed cooked oils and fats that don't go bad, that are stuck in your bread to make it squishy and extend shelf life so it never goes bad. That stuff is indigestible. It won't digest. Your liver doesn't know what to do with it. It gets congested, and liver congested is directly linked to obesity, to depression, and diabetes, all of which are epidemic as we speak today. We're still digging out of that. And by the way, the sugar industry paid Harvard researchers thousands of dollars to not blame sugar on the high cholesterol issue, which was causing the accelerated rate of heart disease, and they stuck it to cholesterol, and they let sugar be. So it was literally paid off, and we spent the next 60 years basically creating an entire brand new diet for the human being based on flawed science and being paid off. And now we have a $16 billion a year gluten industry. We have to think twice. And that's why I wrote the book, Eat Wheat. I want us to at least think it through. If you were once able to digest wheat and dairy and now you can't, then you might not be able to be digesting and breaking down the hard to digest proteins and toxins in the environment. And they're going to go through your your digestive system undigested. And when they're undigested, they're too big to get into your blood and feed you. They end up getting collected into your lymphatic collecting ducts in your intestinal tract, where they congest your lymphs. You get belly fat from that. You get compromised immune system. The lymph is connected to the skin lymph underneath your arms, makes you break out, it gives you rashes. Your brain has lymph. 3 pounds of toxic plaque dumped through brain lymphs they just discovered a year. While you sleep, you drain these lymphatics. And if your lymph is congested around your gut and you got a big belly, and you have indigestion, gas, and bloating, then you're probably not breaking those foods down because of years of processed foods. Processed foods have shown to increase the risk of belly fat, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, high cholesterol, and low good cholesterol by 141%. In the exact same study, they showed that eating whole foods with whole wheat reduced the risk of those things by 38%. People say, oh, wheat's bad for you, it makes you gain weight. Wheat's bad for you, it gives you diabetes. Wheat's bad for you, it gives you Alzheimer's. There are studies that I write in my book, there's over 600 scientific references in my book, proving and giving you the science that says, actually, guys, I'm sorry to tell you, but there are many, many, many studies that show that wheat actually helps you lower your weight, that wheat actually reduces arthritis, reduces Alzheimer's risk, increases cognitive function, lowers blood pressure, helps you lose weight, reduces the risk of diabetes again and again and again. But processed foods and processed wheat has a high glycemic index, and that can act as sugar in your blood and directly be linked to cognitive decline, because sugar is a poison for the brain, not wheat. Wheat has been shown in study after study to be healthy for your system. Now, if you can't digest it, you got to fix your digestion, clean up your diet, get the processed foods out of your body. That's what Eat Wheat's all about. It gives you the strategies to actually do that. But boy, to just say that wheat is bad when it's the sugar that's causing it, should be called sugar belly. And it should be not the grain brain, it should be called the brain drain, because the lymphatic drains are congested due to weak digestion, because it all starts right here. It's fascinating information. No one's talking about it. And I just think we need to hear and the truth, or at least the other side of the aisle. And before you take wheat and dairy out of your diet forever, let's make darn sure you strengthen and reboot your digestive system, because your ability to digest well is your ability to detoxify well. If you don't detoxify well, you're in trouble with this toxic environment that we live in for sure. So it's very, very important. And there's one other thing that I want to talk to you about, which I think is sort of fascinating. There's new emerging studies that are showing that people who eat a gluten-free diet have significantly more mercury, 4 times the mercury in their blood than people who eat gluten or eat wheat. People who eat a gluten-free diet have less good bacteria compared to people who eat wheat. People who eat a gluten-free diet have more bad bacteria compared to people who eat wheat. People who have a gluten-free diet have been shown to have less killer T cells, a measure of your immune strength, than compared to people who eat wheat. What does this mean? Well, I'll give you another example before I move on. The Amish people who have cows for pets and they run barefoot in the barns and they breathe all this farm dust and everything, have the lowest rates of asthma on the planet. The Hutterites, which are also Mennonite farmers who came from Germany and came here, but they industrialized, same genetics, but they have the highest rates of asthma on the planet. They live in farms, but they're industrialized, sterile kind of environments, right? When they measured the dust from the Amish farms, they found that the dust acted as irritants to the respiratory skin to trigger our immune response. It's called the hygiene hypothesis. And what that means is that these foods, like the lectins and the phytic acids and the anti-nutrients that are on wheat and beans and rice and grains and nuts and seeds, which the gluten-free industry is trying to get rid of, by the way. They want all the grains out. It's grain brain, not just, wheat brain. They want all the grains out of our diet. And we've been eating them for millions of years. Like I said, we have enzymes, microbes in every part of our digestive system specifically designed to break down the hard to digest prolamine-rich gluten gliadin molecules. So it's interesting that we're just going to just wipe out a food that we've been eating for so incredibly long. So these hard to digest foods act as intestinal irritants to trigger our immune response. And when you sterilize our environment, which we've done, sterilize our diet, which we are doing because we don't digest well because of pesticides, which have broken down our digestive ability, from processed foods, which have broken down our digestive ability. And instead of fixing that, we just take the foods out of our diet, which are triggers and stimulants for our immune system. And what is that going to mean in 10, 20, 30, 40 years? What happened when we took cholesterol out of our diet? 50 years later, we're digging out of epidemics of obesity, diabetes, and depression. Can we please read the writing on the wall and look at this logically and say, how can I reboot digestion and make this thing better without, and then when you do eat bread, you eat sourdough bread, artisan bread, the ingredients should be wheat, salt, water, an organic starter. It should be really simple ingredients that you've heard of. Nothing on the ingredients of anything you eat should you eat if you don't know what it is. I would highly suggest that be a sort of a golden rule. The phytic acids, they say, another myth. They say phytic acids are toxic for you. They rob minerals out of your body. People get bone density issues. They don't get calcium. They don't get iron. Well, they did studies on this, and they found that people who have a high grain diet, a high phytic acid diet, phytic acid is an anti-nutrient that protects the grain, so it comes off the stalk in the fall and lies there all winter and then sprouts again in the spring, right? So during that time, you need something to protect it from little bugs eating it, right? And those are the phytic acids and the lectins called anti-nutrients. And they're hard to digest, I get it, but those are the digestive irritants that trigger your immune system. Taking those out of your diet, we don't know what that's going to do. I mean, take a little wheat out, take a little corn out, no big deal, right? But take all of it out, the dangerous road to hoe, right? Dangerous road to hoe. So these anti-nutrients, when they found, like phytic acid, for example, people who had a high phytic acid diet had 41% more iron in their blood than people who had a low phytic acid, a low grain diet, suggesting that the phytic acid didn't rob the iron, actually delivered it. They say phytic acid diets make people have bone density issues and osteoporosis. Studies show that people who eat a high grain diet have stronger bones and less osteoporosis. So the study doesn't bear out the fact that, yes, in one part of your intestinal tract, it might rob some mineral absorption, because the phytic acids and the lectins, by the way, are supposed to go undigested to a certain extent in the large intestine, where they feed the intestinal microbiome, which is where we get 80% of our immune system, drive our blood sugar stability, and support the body's health in many, many ways. So what we're finding is that we evolved for millions of years with grains and nuts and seeds, all of which have anti-nutrients. And it's very important that our intestinal skin is healthy enough to endure some of those stimulants, because upstream they trigger an immune response, and downstream they trigger the production of bugs to make short-chain fatty acids, which drive immunity, heal and repair the intestinal skin, feed other good microbes. The list goes on, and we just take studies and say, oh, this chemical does this and therefore it's bad, without looking at the whole picture. Are we throwing the baby out with the bathwater? Terrible analogy, but the idea is that we really, I think, need to look at the whole picture. So in my book, Eat Wheat, I talk about the science that says wheat is bad, and I give you the science that says wheat is good. And I give you strategies to rebuild your digestion, to decongest your lymphatic system, to help be able to digest and detoxify well the way we were designed. And then from there, you can decide whether you need to eat wheat or dairy again. And if you do decide, we eat unprocessed versions of that. And then maybe we can all break bread together someday and do it in a healthy way. Thanks you for listening. I'm Dr. John. Hi, did you like this video? Do you like our content here at LifeSpa? You can subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/John Douillard right here and get this valuable content every week in your inbox.
This recording is brought to you by LifeSpa, where ancient Ayurvedic wisdom meets modern science. Get access to free health video newsletters by Dr. John at lifespa.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.